Hey guys, welcome back from break. Essentially, I want to just take today and I want to cover with you guys the judicial system and how it gets its power in the United States. The last 2 weeks of the semester, we're going to work on a mock trial in government class, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to be basically looking at a constitutional amendment, the Fourth Amendment, and we're going to be examining whether or not a search conducted by a school was reasonable. All right. So when we go over this, I want to talk about how the Supreme Court got its power. And I want to start by just basically reviewing what the judicial system does in the United States. Remember, we have those three branches of our judicial system. That first, wow, slow down. All right. I want to talk about our government and the three branches of our government. Hey, welcome back from break, guys. Today we're going to talk about the judicial system, which is the third branch of government that we haven't really talked about. Well, you and I, Mr. Lushbaugh, and you guys talked about it. But you and I, we haven't really talked about it yet. So now I'm excited to get going with that and make sure that we are good to go with this. So today, introduction to the judicial system. All right, we have three branches in our government. You guys know this. Legislative branch. You make a law, you pass it, you pass budgets, you approve presidential nominees. Not presidents to be, but the nominees of said presidents for, executive positions, congressional positions, or potentially even judicial system, judicial ones. Now, the Supreme Court, very rare that we see a lot of retirees and have a president appoint. Usually somebody is going to wait to retire until they have a president that is like-minded, so that the balance of the court kind of stays the same. It's a really big game. Anyways, legislative branch, you guys know, is the Congress. The executive branch is the president and his cabinet or her cabinet. We'll see what 2016 brings. It enforces the laws and makes appointments as well. So basically what we have to see in those two branches is they work kind of closely together. Yesterday, on Tuesday, doesn't make sense if you're watching this video a week from now, but just in January, we'll leave it there. In January, the Senate reconvened, the House of Representatives reconvened, and the president kind of reconvened. And one of the executive officers in the cabinet, the vice president of the United States, had to be over on Capitol Hill to swear in all the new Senate members yesterday. And there's kind of some funny stories about the way that it goes. It was Joe Biden. He's been almost 36 years in the Senate, so kind of really closely attached to that, and he had a lot of fun with it. Anyways, the last system, the one that you guys talked about when you guys talked about the Bill of Rights and Supreme Court cases, I know you guys talked about that, is the judicial court system of the United States. All right, the judicial system basically rolls on the fairness of what the other two branches are doing. It's kind of their role. It's kind of like the peacekeeper. Now, they do have that check and balance with the executive and legislative, because the executive nominates the justices, and then if they nominate the justices, the next step is the legislative branch has to approve those nominations, and that's kind of how they check and balance on each other. So Constitution Article 3, Section 1 basically says Congress has the right to establish a Supreme Court and inferior courts, and that these judges will hold their behavior or hold their terms, hold their office if they are good. Right? Really, that's what it says. A lot more words, a lot more capital letters, but it still just says that. All right. Section 2 basically explains to us that the judicial power, the right of the judicial branch, happens under certain circumstances. So what we see like, if we have a law and equity arising under this Constitution, the laws of the United States, and treaties made, which shall be made under their authority, to all cases affecting ambassadors or other public ministers and consuls, to maritime jurisdiction, to controversies to which the United States shall be a party, the Supreme Court handles it. That's what it's saying. Okay? So it says that if we have any of these circumstances, Section 2, Part 1 basically lays out when the Supreme Court can get involved. The second part of it basically explains to us how and when people get involved. or what type of things, all right? And it explains to us about the trials of crimes, all right? and how we'll have jury trials and non-jury trials, and it just kind of goes on. But what you really need to take away from this is that Article 3 of the Constitution gives the judicial branch its power. Remember, Article 1 is the legislative branch, Article 2 is the executive branch, and Article 3 is our judicial branch. All right? Article 3 basically gives us the right to have a court system. The United States federal court system and the United States has a state court system. The federal court system is pictured over on that one side of the screen. And what you'll see is that the federal court system is discussed, all right? The Supreme Court was our first one. That was the one that was originally set up. All right, the inferior courts would be the Court of Appeals and the Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit. All right, below that you have specific courts, specific jurisdictions, tax court, district court, federal claims. You have military courts as well under this, and those are all considered those inferior courts that Article 3, Section 1 discussed. So it's important that we kind of look at that and realize that it's kind of like a food chain. Up next, we'll take a look at our Indiana court system, okay? So our Indiana court system is the second part of it because, well, basically the federal government's not going to hear all of our cases. A lot of cases are going to be resolved more locally. Why to go to Washington, D.C.? It's part of this representative democracy that we have. All right, so we have 47 judges that are located in city courts, Indianapolis, Fort Wayne, South Bend, maybe Evansville, all have city courts. And then we have some town courts. Those might be a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller than a city, but not quite there. We only have a few. There's not a whole lot of town courts in the state of Indiana. We have small claims courts, which are located in Marion County, which is in the Indianapolis area, if not the county that Indianapolis is in. Remember, I'm a transplant. I don't know all this. All right, 9 judges sit on the small claims court, and they have a very limited jurisdiction. Now, those are all limited. City courts would be resolving issues within the city. Town courts would be resolving issues within the town. And small claims courts are resolving small claims. Next, we have our trial courts. This is the basic court, okay? This is the court that you and I would go to if we had a speeding ticket or committed murder, whatever one. I'm not saying, all right? Trial courts would be the ones where they have a general jurisdiction, and they kind of work their way through a couple different ways to get through that. So sometimes there's a magistrate, sometimes there's not. But basically we have a trial court, and there's a lot of judges that sit on a trial court, and they have that. Now, if we don't like the outcome, or we disagree, or something went wrong in our trial, all right, or in the state's trial, depending on who's there, right, there's a chance that we can take it to the Court of Appeals, okay? So we have a Court of Appeals in Indiana. We have 5 districts made up of 15 judges. There's 3 judges in each district. And it's kind of the intermediate appellate court, meaning that if we don't like the outcome of the case the first time, we have a chance to appeal to this Court of Appeals, and then they will hear the case. All right. On the other side, we have the Indiana Tax Court. That's a really kind of original jurisdiction, but it's kind of after you've had this, kind of out with the Indiana Internal Revenue Service as we start to go there. Now, there's one last resort. The court of last resort is the Indiana Supreme Court. And the Indiana Supreme Court is basically 5 justices. They sit together and they make a decision after hearing a case from the Court of Appeals. All right. Very rarely does a case jump from a trial to a Supreme Court in any system. And it's important that we kind of remember that as we start to look forward. All right, so we start to definitely see that's there. Now, state court systems follow this basic model no matter where you live. You will notice that they call those things different names. Okay, so some states actually call it the state title court of last resort. Others call it a Supreme Court, the Supreme Court of, whatever it might be. They have different names for them, and the small claims, the town and the city might also change as well. All right. When we take a look at basically how the two systems come together and how a case can go through it, all right, we start over on the left-hand side. We can see the U.S. Federal District Courts. There's 94 courts in the United States. South Bend, here in South Bend, we have a federal district court. I believe Indiana has 2 districts made up of, I think, 3 courts in each. I think Fort Wayne, South Bend, and Gary have federal courts in the north, and then I think there's one in Evansville, one in Indianapolis, and one in Terre Haute that make up the lower ones. All right. I know that, Michigan has Detroit and Grand Rapids with federal courts. Again, transplant, I know some more about there. All right, just kind of there. All right, that's if you commit a federal crime or the crime is between a citizen of one state and a municipality of the other. It would go originally to that federal district court. Next up, you have the local trial courts. The local trial courts would be our city courts here in South Bend, that kind of general trial court that we saw at the bottom rung of the Indiana court system. All right. And then we have a couple specific special interest courts, the Court of Military Appeals, the Court of Claims, and the Court of International Trade. Those just go, if there's an issue there, they go straight up to the Supreme Court. So after the first case is heard in the federal or local court, it goes to an appeals court. In the local court, it goes to our state appeals court. In a federal court, it goes to the Federal Court of Appeals. All right. If that doesn't change, the case can then go one more rung up to the highest court of appeals in that state. All right. That state can then relay over to the U.S. Federal Court of Appeals if necessary, or go up to the Supreme Court. But this is a good graphic to kind of show us how it is. The case that we're going to be working on, I'm going to say that we are in a U.S. Federal District Court. This is the first time hearing the case. It is a case that involves a Constitution issue, so we're going to put it in the Federal District Court, and I'm going to be your Federal District Judge. All right. Number of types of courts in the United States judicial system. The lower courts are both federal and state, hold jurisdiction over certain cases, but usually see the bulk of all case lords. Appellate courts that hear a case for the second time, usually if something went wrong in the first, an appellate court can overturn or agree with the previous court's rulings. Most cases are usually available for an appeal, most cases. All right, and the court of last resort is the highest court, and it is the one that probably has the least amount of work to do, but the greatest impact. All right, so what we see with this court of last resort is we see this idea that they have complete control of what's known as a docket or their schedule and what courses they hear or don't hear. And it's important that we remember that, because if we are to look at this and see this, we need to know that this is happening and that this is happening in a way that is taken care of. The court does not have to hear your case. So just because things went bad doesn't mean the court has to hear your case. All right. Next up, we'll talk about the steps of a trial. After steps of the trial, we'll go through a period of discovery. All right. Have a good day. Take care.